So what? I want some. The list videos. I don't know.
All right. So first thing is first. Let me hand back a DBQ. This is out of 100. I might have stolen a couple of yours to show people.
I stole yours. My DBQ copy. Everything you didn't hear. And nice job.
Yeah, I was good. Oh, you'll get yours. No Pink Floyd. Sorry, you're British. You're British. I thought people did well on this. I was pleased, therefore you should almost all A's and B's. It was a good job. And I think if you got a B on this, you have a very good chance of doing well on the exam. You only got to take, needed information. Oh, I walked over here. I was there. Josh.
Oh, one.
Who is this? Drew. Make a play. I was writing down with this Trinity, don't hide. You're always moving. Every period you seem to be able to see.
Surrender.
Okay, I'll take it.
Who's this?
Who's? I don't. So you mark yours?
I meant to drop that. It says, let me finish handing these out. Okay, did everybody get one except this one set? You did.
You just said good.
Yeah, let's go. That's what I thought. So I gotta get someone started on this. Give me a second. So most got A's and B's on it. Yeah.
Mr. Bradley, I'm a pro at reading your handwriting. Yeah.
Well, that's not your first. Oh, I couldn't read my own writing. Sorry about that. I just saw M and I just put M. I just threw it to M. All right. So let me get someone started, then we'll get going. Put the phone away or get a phone. I'm sure it must have been a really important thing. You're the doctor.
Yeah, I'm just like diving there. I don't know.
I got about 4 makeups. All right, a couple things in really quick. Let's talk very quickly about the DBQ. I thought people overall did good. Where I take points off almost always was about having enough outside information. You still have to show that you know the material. It's not enough to just simply say Japan was ready to surrender. You have to give me examples. And it can't just be what Churchill said. Because Churchill doesn't say anything. Arnold throws out some numbers, but doesn't say anything. You have to say, if your thesis is that Japan was ready to surrender, then you have to say that the Japanese military had been destroyed because they resorted to kamikaze attacks to show you how low they were on supplies. That they were willing to surrender, but they had a term to give up the emperor. That their cities had been firebombed. That the submarines had so totally blockaded them that they're out of supplies. You have to give a couple of those examples. It's not enough to say they're going to surrender. Or it's not enough to say that the United States required unconditional surrender because the Japanese fought hard. Yes, it's great. Mention Bushido, the Code of the Samurai. They would not surrender. Give me examples. That's why I gave Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Need examples. Despite the firebombing, they still fought hard to the bitter end. They used kamikazes, were willing to do suicide bombings. You have to give specific examples. So, same thing with the Soviets. If you're going to say that the United States feared and wanted to intimidate the Soviets, it's not enough to say we didn't like the Soviets. Great. Why? Because at Yalta, they did not, they promised free elections in Eastern Europe, but didn't get the United States and feared communism. What's the example? The Red Scare. The powerful Soviet army had destroyed and decimated the German army even after, for example, at the Battle of Stalingrad or Moscow. Need specific examples. So it's not enough just to simply say it happened. Even if the document said it, that is when you add one or two few more words or one or four more sentences. Yes, is that for me? I can read. That was easy. All right. So after you. Okay, so that's the big thing. And then a couple more things. With the documents. Now, I don't know if they'll take points off, but it is improper to put down in document A. That is improper. I've said that every time. It is wrong to do that. If you put down in document A, they mark it wrong. I've had people write, document A says. Document A doesn't say anything. It's a piece of paper. Who said it was Truman or Arnold or Eisenhower. That's what you have to put down. So put down General Arnold. I repeat, do not put down in document A. Now, they might not take any points off of the answer. But remember, this is subjective. You might get somebody who's writing there going, that is completely improper. Documents do not speak. Yes? So you cite at the end of the sentence and you put down Doc A in parentheses, Doc B in parentheses. That is what you do. And another thing, for half. So half, you just got to explain why the author had that point of view. And so, for example, you put down Arnold believed that the Air Force had won the war. The Air Force has already won the war and the atomic bomb was not necessary because of firebombing and the submarine blockade. That's what you add, what Arnold thought. Or perhaps it's for what Truman thought. Or if it's Yalta, Yalta's in agreement. So the Yalta agreement was written this way because the United States was desperate for Soviet aid, thinking the Japanese might fight on forever, but by the summer, they knew they probably weren't. Now, I'm just saying that to make sure we get that. Now let's get to the one area that people had the most problem. Context. Context. Context is not in that opening paragraph explaining what you're going to write in your body paragraphs. That is not context. Context is background material. I put down CE for a bunch of you, cause and effect. So write down, when you do, or in that opening paragraph, put down the events that led up to the dropping of the atomic bomb. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States got involved in a horrific war of attrition in the Pacific. But the Japanese were on the retreat after the Battle of Midway. But the horrible island hopping campaign by 1945, Japan had been pushed to their home islands. Something like that. Or mention the United States got involved in World War II. Germany had started it by attacking Poland and declared war on the United States. Yes, Germany was defeated on VE Day, May 8, 1945, but Japan kept fighting. That is the background material. Don't write about, and then the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a decision that profoundly affected American history. No, not that fluff. Get down facts. Background material. Things that are not in your body paragraph. In that conclusion, finish it with the Cold War and the Truman Doctrine. The effect, what came out of it. That is context. Get that in the opening paragraph. When they see it, they check off a little box. And that's one point. You get a good thesis statement where you address the question and be clear. You have a good blueprint or BP where you're going to say, force Japanese surrender and intimidate the Soviets. That's 2 points. You get historical evidence, firebombing. Japan wanted to keep their emperor, Eastern Europe. That's another point. Heck, you're already at 3. You haven't even done 1 document. Heck, you just described 3 documents, and that's a point. You describe 4 documents and relate to your thesis, that's a point. That's 5 out of 7. You get 5 out of 7 on the DBQ on the AP exam, and you're probably going to pass the AP exam. And heck, on the other essay, you get good context and good thesis. It's 2 out of 6. 2 examples of evidence, that's 1 more point. 4 examples, that's 2 points. You pass the test. Sure, we'd like to get 4 examples of half, but that's all you need. Let me give you a couple examples. I had some very good ones. A lot of A's, a lot of B's. According to the transcript, I just said apples 3 times. So I stole a couple people's essays. I hope they don't mind. So I thought this was a very good opening, a little long, but still very good context. They talk about the war, they give me examples of the things that led up to. That's what I put down, World War II, the events before August 6th. Very good. A couple things, a couple of sentences were kind of awkward, but hey, there's going to be awkward sentences in a timed essay. The only sentence you can't be awkward on is your thesis. And let's say you have unique handwriting. My handwriting's kind of perfect, but let's say you have unique handwriting. Make sure that thesis statement is the one you take your time, write it out. Some people have great handwriting, don't worry about it. And then thesis statement addresses the main issue, but they have firebombing, they have Yalta, they have all this great information, background material. And then we get right here, the first sentence is going to be on Japan's fighting. It's right up here, Japan's military force, Japan's fighting, gets right to it. Let me give you another example. Now here we got to work on the handwriting. It's far too big. No, it's perfect. It's very good. It's a very good opening, good background material. Underline your thesis other than that. And the reason we underline it is, this is actually a crucial point. People grading, if you're taking the AP exam, the people grading have like a couple minutes per essay. They're flying. They got to search for your thesis statement, they might miss it. Help them out. Underline it. It really makes a difference. They look at it and say, oh, thank you. I like this person. I'm going to give them a good grade. Maybe it's not quite that easy, but yes, it does work. So we have good background material, very good thesis statement, address the question about surrender, about intimidating the Soviet Union rather than Japanese surrender. The statement said, intimidate the Soviet Union and Japanese surrender, have to address that in your thesis statement, it's addressed. Good. If you didn't address Japanese surrender to the Soviet Union in your thesis statement, you probably won't get that point. Gotta be fair on that. Even the rest of the essay is good, it's the way life is. And then Japan, Russia, we got that there, and right here, that topic sentence, right there in that thesis. Very good. Want to see one more? Now this one, we have a couple corrections. Oh, and right here we have good hat, and then document B. Makes it, if you have that little parentheses with the document there, makes it so much easier for them to say. Much easier to see it. But let's get to another one. Couple little arrows, it happens, but it's good. Nice job. It's very good. And it's going to happen. If you put it maybe on the side, if you start running into trouble with this, let's say you start writing and realize, oh, I forgot like the most important part of this paragraph, and you're halfway done, put a little asterisk and put it at the bottom and just make it clear what you're doing. A little asterisk and a little asterisk kind of tie it in there. But very good background material, good thesis statement. Start with forced Japan surrender. Here we jump right in with Japanese surrender of Bushido. We got a good document, little star for half. Explain why they felt that way. Good job. I had good essays. Think you guys can do really well on the AP exam. And if you start, you just think always describe three and describe 4 and relate to the describe 3. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. Describe 3 documents, that's 1 point. Describe 4 and relate to your thesis, that's another point. This is just evidence. I thought this was overall pretty good. And if you got an A and B on this, I think you have a very good chance of passing it. Once again, this is subjective, and I have no idea what kind of question you're going to get. I have no idea. You know, it could be on literally anything. It could be on anything from basically the American Revolution, the events leading up to that, to, you know, Cold War. That's basically what we're looking at. Speaking of the Cold War, let's get to it. Yeah.
It was like right around the
You got the one for that.
I
You didn't get that. You I didn't.
and I said this from Boston Stories and had to like teach tax. And I one of the one becoming scholars looks. Let me see.
Oh, I think you have 5. 5 on 6.
So my thing I started
There's some issues. Oh, yeah. There's some, you know, this is something that when a great, there's always different issues. So I have to adjust people very well. If you have anybody, if we go back in that time, we go back and read, it's always going to be on. And it actually, that's the tough thing about life. And then once you start writing, what's that? Stuff happens. But on your thesis statement, try to get it right. Everything else, just do the best. All right, let's go and get to McCarthyism. Hey, good job though. A's and B's, I was pleased. A's and B's, I was pleased. I'm a poet, didn't know it. Okay, have you noticed the new board? Have you guys acknowledged the rug, by the way, today?
I love it.
It really ties the room together, don't you think? It just ties it together. Where do we finish here? Did we get to this?
We got through and then McCarthy's era when we said.
Or did I talk about him dying?
No, we got to there, to the end of
Yeah.
You did. You said like, I know liver.
Yeah. His liver was like 4 or 5 times the size of a normal liver. Oh, so what were the 2 shocks? And it's no coincidence. These 2 big things happens, and next you know there's McCarthyism. Joe won and who got the UN seat instead of the People's Republic for 30 years? Yeah, Taiwan. And the Soviets are going to boycott the United Nations going to 1950 because they're angry over this. Even though I got to be clear, Mao and Stalin didn't like each other. And let's see, we got this. What am I missing? Oh, I'm missing something else. Who did Truman defeat in 48 for president? The big upset. Yeah, Dewey. And what happened to the Democrats? What did the Democrats split over? Yeah, civil rights. Who was the states' rights or Dixiecrat candidate? Strom Thurmond of South Carolina. And yeah, Dewey or Roosevelt, or sorry, Truman did win a big political victory. This is a massive victory. And what was it called? Accusing your opponent of being soft on communism. What is that term?
Red baiting.
Yeah, that's red baiting. And this is McCarthyism. McCarthyism was pure red baiting. There was no evidence. He never had proof. But all it took is one accusation. So, for example, there were nobody who knew anything about China in the State Department because they'd either been run out by McCarthy or were scared to say anything. So that's McCarthy at the end. Yeah, he died only 47 when he died. Okay, that might seem young, that might seem relatively old to you. That seems very young to me. And the bear, though, could be anywhere. Okay, I just found a bear on a bumper car, so I had to show you. And remember HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, and just basically running roughshod. This is a Herblock cartoon. This congressman by the name of Richard Nixon got his name on HUAC by attacking various people for communism. A couple actually might have had communist ties, but he just made his name for that. So let's get to Korea. So, in context of McCarthyism, HUAC, the second Red Scare, Korean War fits in, unfortunately, very nicely. So, just like Germany, this was hastily done, 38th parallel, divided up into Soviet and American occupation zones. In 49, both the Soviets and the United States left, and they left two new countries. Once it was clear, like in Germany, they weren't going to come up with a solution to unify. Kim Il-sung was a tough guerrilla fighter. He had fought with Mao and had been trained in the Soviet Union. He was the real deal as a fighter, a brutal dictator, but a real deal. He was the leader in the North. He had an army. He had over 100 tanks. The United States left an ill-prepared dictator by the name of Syngman Rhee, who promised democracy, but of course never delivered. He was not well known in his country. He had been in exile because the Japanese kicked him out. Didn't have much of an army, ill-prepared. And now South Korea is an incredibly industrialized, wealthy country, but certainly not then. And there was talk of unification. But when North Korea decided to do it by force, it took literally everybody by force. By surprise. June 25th, 1950, North Korea attacked. They easily brushed past the ill-equipped South Korean army. North Korea had 100 tanks, good tanks, Soviet T-34 tanks, and blew right through, yeah. It's out at 10:30.
I think that's what she's going to show.
Wait 2 minutes. And so blew right past, took Seoul, which is just south of the border, Pyongyang's capital, North Korea, and immediately the United States freaked out. Remember, Truman was blamed for losing China. And according to the Truman Doctrine, who is actually leading this attack by North Korea? Stalin. Actually, Stalin, who was aiding North Korea, was taken by surprise as much as the U.S. He did not know North Korea was going to do this and did not propose it, but they just did it. But in the United States, it's Stalin. And they used to talk about how Korea points like an arrow or points like a dagger into Japan, and Japan's next. Remember the domino theory. Korea, we have China, now Korea, Japan, what's next? Wyoming. Thank you. Right to Wyoming. So Truman committed troops. I don't know why I put commits. Once again, I put myself in that era. he committed troops. He did not ask for a declaration of war. His justification was not just the Truman Doctrine. It was those shocks in 49. It was McCarthyism. He couldn't afford to look soft on communism. He was being hammered because of China. So he announced that the United States, without a declaration of war, there he is giving the speech right there. He gave a press conference back when presidents used to give press conferences. They never do now and haven't for your whole life. They just don't give them, almost never. They might answer occasional question. It's, but reporters were trying to ask him, is this a war? Is this an attack? Are we going to war? And he didn't want to say war because he was worried that this might lead to World War III. Remember, the Soviets had just exploded their bomb. So a reporter, exasperated, said, is it a police action? And Truman said, yes, it's a police action. What the heck is a police action? This is a full-scale war in Korea. And yet Truman's going to call it a police action, and that's going to be a dark joke. A dark joke for the rest of the war. And so the United Nations will actually lead this. This is the only time that the United Nations will lead an example of collective security. Remember the veto in the Security Council? The Soviets were boycotting it at that moment. And so they didn't veto it. And remember, the People's Republic of China is not allowed in it. Taiwan voted for it, France voted for it, Britain voted for it. So the only time in the history of the United Nations it had operated together as collective security. Remember, that goes way back to Article 10 of the Treaty of Versailles. Oh, sure, there have been UN operations, UN peacekeeping forces, but never like this. So all the forces, most of them will be US and South Korea, are going to fight under the UN flag. Here's a UN flag. This is in the high mountains during the stalemate of 53. Here's hoisting the UN flag. The overall commander would be the highest ranking US Army officer in the Pacific. He was the Governor General of Japan, Douglas MacArthur. There's MacArthur on a Navy ship at the Battle of Incheon. And MacArthur was in the early 70s, and people thought maybe war had passed him by, but he insisted. He was a hero of this kind of anti-communist wing of both the Republicans and the Democrats, so he was allowed to take command. But Britain's going to send a couple brigades. Canada's going to send forces. Luxembourg sends like 20 men. Belgium sends forces. All these countries did. The Philippines, Taiwan, American allies sent forces. So the first U.S. troops, fresh from Japan, they were on occupation duty, kind of fat and happy. It's pretty cushy duty in Japan. They were ill-equipped. They were sent right here south of Daejeon, a massive city in South Korea today, and they were routed. North Vietnamese tanks, did I say North Vietnamese? Wrong war. North Korean tanks routed them, ran right over them, a humiliating defeat. In fact, that's a wounded American soldier. That's a North Korean T-34 tank. In fact, the remnants of the South Korean forces and the few American forces that arrived were forced back to this little perimeter around the harbor city of Busan. That's all they held. But the North Korean supply line had been overextended. Their tanks began to break down, and they didn't have enough to push to Busan. And so they held out there. If they would have taken Busan, probably would have been over. But this was really humiliating. Now Stalin's on the march. He's winning again, and U.S. forces are routed. What's next? And that fear of the Soviet army and that communism being something that takes you over, makes you into Superman. Remember how they defeated the Germans? Seem to be taken hold. Well, the Americans are bringing every reinforcement they could. They expanded the draft. They even called back thousands of men who had been in the army in 45 and mustered out. They brought them back. Remember, I told you they have you for 8 years. So, for example, my wife's grandfather from Phillipsburg, he was in the Navy when the war ended in 1945. He was called back and put on an aircraft carrier and sent across the Pacific in 1950. And then when he got there, my wife's aunt was born and decided, well, you have 3 kids. You should be in the service, and they sent him back. And so that was his experience then. But a lot of people did. The most famous was maybe the greatest hitter in Major League Baseball history. He was a Marine fighter pilot in World War II, played for the Boston Red Sox named Ted Williams. And they called him back, and he was put in a Marine fighter plane over Korea, which he was furious. He lost his best years in baseball because of 2 wars. But anyways, Marines started coming. And everyone said, well, we got to reinforce Pusan. MacArthur came up with an audacious plan. What if we swing around and attack them at the harbor city or Seoul, at a place called Incheon? Nobody said it would work right here in Incheon. It worked better than anyone thought. The North Koreans were taken by surprise. There wasn't really a beach. There was just a muddy flat up to a seawall here, Marines climbing over it. But the North Koreans didn't defend it. They were overextended. They landed in Incheon, quickly advanced on Seoul, and it looked like the North Koreans were routed. MacArthur would win arguably his greatest victory in history. And the North Koreans literally just started to run north. They were beaten. But here's where MacArthur screwed up. MacArthur got the idea, the US, we can unify Korea. We'll do it on our own. And so instead of cutting them off, he took those same Marines and landed them way up here and began to invade the north, widening the war. Now it's the other side getting mad. And remember, the People's Republic of China had just become a country, and they're very worried about the United States. And now most of the American forces are driving north into North Korea. In fact, by the end of October, American and South Korean forces had arrived on the Yalu River, the northern border. So this map shows Pusan, and they got right here. In fact, US patrols were crossing over into China. And this time Mao Zedong warned, we cannot tolerate an enemy force on our border, and will intervene. He threatened to intervene. In fact, Chinese forces were already infiltrating, and Americans had captured the Chinese. But MacArthur was riding this wave of glory, so was Truman. We're winning, I'm popular. And American forces were ill prepared for the fighting in Korea. Korea is cold, really cold. They thought it would be warm and comfortable like southern Japan. It's the same latitude, that's what they thought. This part of Korea, by the middle of November, it's below 0. And the US are still wearing summer canvas uniforms and are bitterly cold. They're stuffing paper anything they could into the uniforms. American forces are ill prepared. And then the Chinese counter. Oh, I jumped the gun. MacArthur and Truman even met. And MacArthur assured Truman, China will never enter this war. And if they do, we will deliver them such a fatal blow that it will rock China to the core and maybe even bring back the nationalists. Truman, there he is, Truman meeting MacArthur. The first time they ever met, it was on Wake Island, 1950. Truman, wanting to believe it's true, it's a midterm election, believed him, or allowed himself to believe him. And then the Chinese counterattacked. Thanksgiving Day, actually. November 1950. The China counterattacked, and it was a massive attack. I like this in Time magazine, where they have China as a body blow, and you know with these very wicked looking brass knuckles right here for China. It was the worst defeat American forces have ever had since the Battle of Little Bighorn. That's how bad it was. American forces here were overwhelmed by attacking Chinese. It was over 20 below when the Chinese attacked. The Chinese forces had quilted, warm uniforms. The Americans had nothing like that. And if they're wounded, they froze to death on the spot. And here are Chinese forces on the advance. And the Chinese didn't have the heavy equipment, didn't have the technology, but they had lots of men. They would use bugles to announce their call. Talking to Korean War veterans, the sound of a bugle would start them to shake. Marines were almost cut off here. And the United States almost lost 3 Marine divisions that were pulled out by the Navy. It was a disastrous defeat. The Chinese pushed them all the way past. This map doesn't show it as good as I hope. So act like this, I didn't put this map up here. But they pushed them all the way past Seoul. It was humiliating defeat for no reason at all. They could have gone up to the 38th parallel and won a big victory and ended it right there. But MacArthur wanted the total victory. And Truman allowed it to happen. So MacArthur, embarrassed, threatened to widen the war. He threatened to not only use atomic bombs to stop the Chinese, but even put a couple on Beijing and maybe Moscow. So he's talking World War III. Truman ordered him to shut up, and MacArthur refused. In fact, criticized the president publicly. Going into 1951, Truman kept asking, can we get rid of him? And they're like, you're the commander-in-chief. And I know, but he's politically important. He's politically popular. But finally, MacArthur was fired. Truman got the guts to fire. Replaced him with Matt Ridgway. That's all we need to know is MacArthur was fired. And MacArthur came back, first time he's been in the United States for nearly 20 years. And he arrived back, he had a massive ticker tape parade here. Through the streets of New York City, thousands of protesters marched in New York City, Washington, D.C., saying, bring MacArthur back and fire Truman. This was an incredibly controversial move. And a lot of rabid anti-communists said Truman was losing the war, losing the country, maybe he's a traitor. And MacArthur became a hero of this kind of right-wing anti-communist wing that was developing in both parties, but especially the Republican Party. And here's a couple examples of him. People thought he might get the Republican nomination in '52. He thought he'd get the Republican nomination. So here's Truman, his new Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, at the Pentagon on a Bunsen burner being cooked by the firing of MacArthur. Here, the little man in the White House and the glorious figure of MacArthur. And here's Truman as a little kid, like a baby whining, I'm running this war. But Truman, after the great victory at Incheon, had monumentally screwed up, totally underestimated the Chinese, and was actually totally distanced from what was really going on. I should add, he really thought he'd get the Republican nomination. But his casual talk of World War III actually scared a lot of people. I know that might shock you. World War III sounds fun. And he never got the nomination. Well, American and UN reinforcements arrived, and the Chinese who got to here were eventually pushed up to here by mid-1951, and for the next 2 years, they sat on this line, and it was stalemate. And it was much like World War I. Horrific trench warfare basically became a fight for kills in the high ground. So here are U.S. forces overlooking a ridge that would have some of the worst fighting of the war. The American forces dumped at Fort Chop Ridge. These are actually Canadian forces, and that is a Chinese with a Soviet submachine gun. So the United States is now involved with a bloody war in China, with China that's going nowhere over Korea. Yeah.
Did Truman ever admit that it's a war, or did Truman
No.
continue to call it police action?
Police action, and that remained. He was so scared to say that it was another war for people who think it's World War III. But yeah, it was a war. And it was not a declaration of war. So that is a good place to start the 50s. And naturally, we have to have a McDonald's, right? The first McDonald's is actually no longer, they tore it down in the 70s, but does anybody know the city where the first McDonald's was? You're close, it's in California, a little bit south. A little bit south. A little bit southwest. San Bernardino, California. The first McDonald's. Yeah, they tore it down. That actually should be like a museum. It's kind of sad. That's actually the McDonald's in Omaha, one of the first franchises, and it still looks like that to this day.
There's a great movie about the founding of McDonald's.
But, about the franchise.
Yeah.
About Cook. Yeah, that's a good movie. And his Dick and Maurice McDonald's bought it and they sold it to Ray Kroc. So let's get, while Korea's going on, we have the election of 1952. Well, the Republicans, a lot of more conservative Republicans wanted MacArthur. But they also knew that Eisenhower would be a much better candidate. And when Eisenhower kind of announced he was commander of NATO, you know, I'm a Republican. Basically, that's what he did. They made him the Republican nominee. His running mate will be Richard Nixon, who gained fame red baiting. Eisenhower was a liberal Republican. And so he would be balanced with Nixon. This is one of the few times I'll mention a vice president who will not become president immediately. Like, a lot of times I only mention the vice president when the president dies in office. But we will get back to Nixon. Nixon's kind of crucial. The Democrats ran the governor of Illinois, Adlai Stevenson, who didn't want to run because he thought Eisenhower would be too popular, and he was right. Eisenhower had this glow from World War II, and Stevenson knew it. He was a New Dealer. He backed away from the civil rights platform of Truman, even though he believed it, so he wasn't exactly a profile in courage. But I love these two little, Eisenhower was Ike. I like Ike became the slogan. But I really like this. They handed out cigarettes for the campaign. So the I like Ike cigarettes and the Adlai Stevenson. Hey, have some cigarettes. You're 10 here, have 2 packs. Yeah, the 1950s. You remember that's back when they told women if you're pregnant, cigarettes will help in pregnancy. It deals with morning sickness. Yeah, we all know that. Don't smoke. Okay, moving on. Well, the Republicans had a great advantage. They could hit the Democrats for being soft on communism. And Eisenhower, the great general, will solve Korea. Now, this is kind of fascinating to me. The Democrats are soft on communism. Truman has sent hundreds of thousands of American troops to stop communism, whatever that might mean, in Korea, and that's soft on communism. That should give you the idea of the insanity of the Cold War. But the big thing they pushed was something called the bomber gap. And the gap was this. The United States are now vulnerable because there's a gap between the huge numbers of Soviet long-range bombers that could fly from their bases at places like Murmansk over the Arctic and bomb the United States. And it's important. This is the important fact. And they can fly back so they can do it again. The Soviets have a huge gap and they have so many more bombers. And people believed it because of what it had to be. Joe won, McCarthyism. We must be behind. There was a gap, a huge gap. And the Republicans said there was a gap the Soviets had. Yeah, there was a gap. The United States had about 600 B-29 and B-50 bombers, the type of bombers that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. We also had this monstrosity called the B-36 Peacemaker. It made 200 of these. Had 8 engines. Oh yeah. The United States had over 1,100 bombers that could reach the Soviet Union and make it back to bases in the U.S. Does anybody want to guess how many bombers the Soviets had? 0. There was a gap. It was just the other way. But everyone believed it. Hey, good job. Serious. Most of you did really well in the DBQs, and those who didn't, just a few extra things, and you could have got a great job. Huh? I got it. We'll do the first 5 minutes possible, okay?
First 5 minutes,
That's
paragraph.
You got 15 minutes,
Okay.
Goodbye, everybody! Okay, thank you for letting me use your paper. I'm asking after the fact.
Oh, yeah.
Good job.
Good job. I know, I kept forgetting things. I was like, what the heck am I doing? No, they're having. I kept.